Okay, I have to quit and reopen because of some permissions issue. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So is it fine, or you still need some permissions?
Let's see. I hope. Oh, it works quite different from Zoom. Okay.
You must find an arrow mark, upward arrow mark with open share tray.
Yeah. Recent. Let's see. I found the file, but share content. Let me make sure. So do you see anything at all? Because I just see the screen we have.
Yeah. If you just drag the cursor on the screen, you can find the camera, the microphone, and an open share tray option. Just on the screen, if you move on the cursor.
The share content cursor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Open share tray. It would say open share tray.
Presenter mode, add background, screen. Oh, let's see. Open share tray. It's not showing any open share.
It'll be on the top, right next to where your mic is, next to the leave button. There's an upward arrow. That should be open share tray.
Yeah. So
what computer are you using?
Reporter mode.
Have you downloaded the MS Teams app, or are you trying to connect from the?
No, this is the app itself. Yeah, this is from the app, but it's showing me part.
Showing you? Would you like me to run the presentation for you from here? You can do that.
I think that he disconnected.
Did we lose him? Yeah, he's frozen, right?
Yeah, the screen is frozen.
Yes, yes.
Maybe it's a bandwidth problem at his end.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mohan, are you able to hear me now?
Yes. Somehow my computer decided to reboot itself. I'm just so I've in that share tray I found open the file from your computer.
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it'll give you two sets of options. It'll give you an option to open share the screen and share a window or a file. Do click on the share window option.
Okay, let me see if the file works, if that's the native way of doing it.
Yeah, you have to open the file first and then do share window and click on the file, open file.
Okay.
It's Microsoft, they don't make anything easy for you.
Okay.
Dr. Thakur, who's the first speaker? Is it Dr. Kaveri or Professor Manmohan?
Dr. Kaveri is the first speaker.
Kaveri, yeah.
Yeah, he had logged in and he has checked if he can share the screen. So
Great.
he'll be back in a second.
Right.
So share,
yeah,
share content.
Yeah. The left one should say screen, the right one should say window.
This is on the Mac.
Yeah, okay.
Share. So I press share content only, share window. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you click share window and then choose the window that you in which your live file is.
So that one is not showing at all.
Have you opened it?
PowerPoint is the only one open with that file, but that's the window that's not showing.
What you can do, first of all, let me try this.
PowerPoint is open.
PowerPoint is open, right?
With the file, yeah.
Yeah. So what you do is when you go to share window, probably what you have to do is you have to exit sharing and come back to share window.
Okay.
Exit sharing, restart sharing, then come back to share window.
Share window. Yeah.
Now scroll down, you should be able to find it.
Yeah, it has 5 choices, which are not actually.
That's okay. There'll be another choice down there.
Yeah. The other one, they said you can PowerPoint live, show your slides, and then it's showing me slides from many years ago, not the. So if I say browse my computer and I select this file,
yeah, it should give you that.
But nothing comes up. So last time it just rebooted when I did that. So this is.
Then the other option is just share your screen and then bring this to the front of the screen.
So how do I share the screen?
When you go back to the thing before share window where you could share content.
Yeah, so it says presenter mode and there are 4 content only. So I do content only and there is no nothing there. Let me put it on OneDrive and see if that'll.
Otherwise, can you send it to me? I'll just run it for you.
Yeah, I'll send you the slides anyway, just as a. So I've sent you the file.
Okay. Sure, here shortly enough.
And I'll do this OneDrive business because that's the other thing which I'm told works. It's something to do with securities, I think.
I got your slides have reached me though.
On mental, on security.
Yeah, could be. On Mac, there is a sharing thing. You have to give access to MS Teams on security.
Yeah, I already did that. Yeah, we.
Right. Anyway, I have your slides now. So.
Okay.
Should I share for and test?
Just give me 1 second. Let me try this browser thing once more.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
So how would I make it bigger if I needed to?
It's as big as it is on our screen. It's already perfect on our screen.
Oh, okay. Okay.
If you scroll, can you just scroll forward and let's make sure the slides are scrolling? Go to the next slide and. Yeah, they're scrolling. Perfect. So everything is tickety-boo.
So just leave it as it is. Okay.
Yes. Dr. Sirini, Kaveri, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Always blessed. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, my
National
pleasure.
Science Day greetings to both of you.
Merci. Thank you very much.
Derrière.
Très bien.
You have Professor Sodhi on the other screen. He is
Namaskar, Sodhi Saab.
from London, Bay School of Business.
I can see that. Yes, his slide is mentioned up there. Yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
So
right.
When your slides show up, should I get rid of mine or leave it as it is?
No, you'll have to get yours because we'll have to let Professor Kaveri share first for his lecture. Hopefully you'll be able to come back in. If not, I'm always there as backup.
Okay. So how do I quit this?
Go back to that share.
Stop presenting.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay.
We're all set. Dr. Thackeray, your show.
Yes, sir.
Should I just rest few seconds my slides before you open it for the public?
Yes, please.
Sure.
You don't. I'm just opening my slide.
Yeah, you'll only see very few people on the MS Teams thing. It's on a YouTube webcast.
Okay,
so
good.
All our people are joining there. That way we don't have any interference from, people turning on their mics and all that.
Yes, and people coughing and sometimes those flushing of the water and all those. We have witnessed all those in the last 2 years, haven't we? And the
Yes.
baby coming in and crying in front, but it's all part of the game. I'm opening the slides and I'm told that I have roughly 45 minutes to cover the 2 topics that I wish to cover.
Yes, please.
Yeah, one is on the mechanisms of collaboration and another one on a small semi-scientific talk. And I'll take roughly 45 minutes. And if I, trespass your timings, Manmohan, you have to forgive me for a few minutes. I will, or you can give me a signal saying that you're talking too much, which I often do, but I'll try to control myself. Okay, open share tray. And here I am, and here I am. And are you seeing the slides?
You're seeing it in the slide sorter mode, so you'll have to go to full screen.
Yeah, I have clicked the display mode. Now we should be okay.
Yes, sir. Absolutely perfect.
Why did it go away? Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'm all set now.
Okay, Dr. Thackeray, over
But
to
do I
you.
have to disconnect
Yeah.
and then come back again?
No, you can leave the slides on, please.
Leave it. Right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. Before we begin, I would like to know from the speakers today, would you permit us to record the proceedings of today's program, sir?
Yes.
No problem for me. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. I request Mr. Sridhar Kumar to kindly proceed with the recordings of today's program.
And the webcast.
And of course, the webcast as well.
Breakfast is already ready, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sridhar.
Okay. So, Namaskar. 20th February every year is celebrated as the National Science Day to mark and recognize the contributions of scientists towards the development of the country. On this very day, in 1928, Indian physicist Chandrasekhara Venkata Raman made an important discovery in the field of spectroscopy, which was later named after him, the Raman effect. For his work, Sir C.V. Raman was awarded the prestigious Nobel Prize in Physics in 1930. The National Council for Science and Technology Communication, that's NCSTC, in 1986 proposed the Government of India to announce February 28th as National Science Day. The government accepted the proposal, and the first National Science Day was celebrated on February 28th, 1987. The theme this year is Integrated Approach in Science and Technology for Sustainable Future. I would, however, like to reiterate the tweet from Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji, wherein he has mentioned, let us reaffirm our commitment towards fulfilling our collective scientific responsibility and leveraging the power of science for human progress. The day is celebrated to raise awareness on the importance of science. In line with this, today we are all here on this virtual platform to hear from two of the very eminent speakers of international repute. I would therefore request Dr. Anjan Ray, Director CSIR-IIP, to kindly address the gathering by the introduction and welcome of the speakers. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Thackeray. It is a very special occasion, as every year, to be hosting National Science Day on behalf of CSIR, Indian Institute of Petroleum. This year's theme, which deals with the integrated aspects of science in the service of sustainable societies, requires a different thinking from laboratory-bound scientific research, which, while it is at the core of the scientific effort, is not adequate if we have to go serve society and deliver a sustainable solution for planet Earth, which is the only planet we have. To that extent, we are extremely privileged to have with us two outstanding speakers today. Dr. Sirini Kaveri, Director, CNRS Bureau in India, Embassy of France, New Delhi, who is also a ICMR INSERM member and has been at INSERM since 1990. He received his veterinary medicine degree in Bangalore and his PhD at the Pasteur Institute in Paris. He carried out his postdoctoral training at the University of California, San Diego, and has been at CNRS, France since 1990. His work is extensively in areas of medical research, particularly some seminal work in hemophilia, for example, on immunopathology generally, also on immunotherapy, which is a rapidly expanding field of applied medical science. But he also wears a second hat, that of a scientific administrator and collaboration or bridge builder. He's been very active in Indo-French research activities as an adjunct professor at the Institute of Bioinformatics and Applied Biotechnology, IBAB, Center for Human Genetics, CGH at Bangalore, and Amity University, Noida. I already mentioned his work with ICMR and CERN, and since the last 7 years, he has been at CNRS as the director of the New Delhi Bureau at the French Embassy. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Kaveri for his talk, and then I will come back and introduce Professor Manmohan Singh Sodhi, who works on the other aspect of integrated science that is very important to us, which is integrated supply chains. And I'll come to that when I speak of his introduction. But for now, looking at science in the services society, over to Professor Sirini Kaveri.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Yes, clear?
Yes,
I hope.
please.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Anjan. And before I start, I would like to thank you. And I'm honored today to be part of this event. And thanks for this invitation once again. So what we'll do over the next 45 minutes is to split my talk into two, which is what Anjan wanted me to do. We look at how we can collaborate between your institution and in general the European Union and France in particular and CNRS again. And the second part, I'll be talking about a small aspect of my scientific work, my research in my laboratory. So to start off, I'm told that there are children that are born with a viral infection called Zika in Brazil, where, as you can see here, that little child's head size is absolutely regressed. And it seems the kids are born with an absolutely malformed or ill-formed brain. That happens in Brazil. And it seems there is a lot of pollution in Delhi. And it says the people say that Arctic is warming faster than any other region on Earth, or in fact, half of the world will face severe water scarcity soon. I hear all these things, and then I'm also told that in the United States, each year more than 35,000 people die as a result of antibiotic resistance, meaning they have become resistant to the antibiotics and they cannot be treated. And it seems somewhere in Wuhan in China, a couple of years ago, there was a virus called Corona. I don't know whether we heard about it and whether it had any impact on us. So why am I saying that? What is all this? What's our problem? Why should we worry about all these things that are going on either in Wuhan somewhere or in Brazil or elsewhere? These are the societal challenges. These are important for all of us, no matter where they are. And you have understood how 2 years ago we had not heard of Corona, and now practically every human being's life has been impacted by that. And the societal challenges that the European Union has identified covers, for example, health issues that I just mentioned, demographic changes, climate change, clean and efficient energy, smart and integrated transport, food security, and bio-based economy. These are some of the societal challenges that we have to address to make the world, a better place, as Anjan was mentioning. So why should we worry about the societal challenges? What's your role there? The way I look at it is, particularly addressing scientists in scientific institutions like yours. First, you are eligible to tackle these challenges. Two, you are capable, meaning there is a willingness to do that. Third, most important, you are responsible for this world. As Anjan mentioned, there is no planet B. You are responsible to make sure that things don't go out of our hand. So understanding these societal challenges that I already mentioned, if you are developing some solutions for that, you need an industrial relation and leadership to take these ideas, scientific ideas, over to plausible solution, industrial solution. But the bottom line is excellent science. You have to have a good science to tackle these issues. And to do so, to do good science and then tackle these societal challenges, the European Union has put in not less than 95 billion euros for the next 5 years under the Horizon Europe program. And it is there for you if you want to get a piece of that, a small chunk of that. It's possible because people, particularly European countries, have contributed significantly. I have shown that on all the blue dots here, or the blue blobs here. They show the contribution of the European Union countries towards this expense. And then France occupies a decent place in that. And however, although it may not look nice, this, India's position compared to China is quite low in terms of investment and also in terms of the number of people in science, 15 out of 100,000 people, whereas China is 111, and in the United States you have as many as 423 people work out of every 100,000 population in science. So there is a lag in India. So to bridge this lag, collaboration is the key. And what I'm going to do over the next 10 minutes or so is to put in front of you some of the mechanisms that you have in front of you, and that you are they are accessible by you, and you are eligible for that. And we can discuss more in detail later, but then I'll just display those mechanisms. The first one is the European Union. In European Union, as I mentioned to you, we have Horizon Europe, and that provides the collaborative mechanisms to work on health, water, bioeconomy, biotechnology, nanotechnology, advanced material. I'm sorry about this. I don't know automatically why it is changing. And then you have this researchers' mobility. Meaning you have Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions. This is for scholarships to go to Europe, any of the European countries. And you have PhD scholarships, postdoc, and short-term mobility of research and innovation staff, plus the prestigious European Research Council grants. These are extremely prestigious and quite lucrative and attractive in terms of funding. So if you have a bright idea, do not worry. You just go for it, and then there are several Indians who have benefited from this. And this goes to the tune of almost 3 to 5 million euros over a period of 4 to 5 years. So if you have questions on those, we will come back to them. As I have a limited time, I will not go into the details right now. But let me come back to France. I mean, the moment you think of France, obviously, I don't know what comes to your mind, but in my mind, I think of good wine and our perfumes, nice perfumes, or even World Cup. We win sometimes World Cups. We have Zinedine Zidane's, we have Kylian Mbappe's in France. But then there's also the inevitable Eiffel Tower. However, there is more to it. You know, if you know who these people are, Lavoisier, Louis Braille, Pascal, the Pascal's law, and René Descartes. You have Marie Sklodowska-Curie, and Louis Pasteur. I'm sure you have heard of these names. These are all great innovators or French scientists that have contributed significantly in science in France. And then more recently, you must have heard the name of Esther Duflo and Abhishek Banerjee, who got the Nobel for economics in 2019. And last year we had Emmanuel Charpentier and Cédric Villani in 2010. Totally in France, sorry about the background sound. Totally in France, there are 71 Nobel laureates, 12 Fields medals, and the 6th in publication, and CNRS is 2nd in this. So what we are trying to say here is France is an attractive country, and we work quite closely with France. India and France work quite closely. And apart from USA, UK, Germany, and South Korea, France occupies the next place for India in terms of scientific collaborations. So there are all the reasons to work with. How can you collaborate with France? Say FIPRA is the keyword. Note it down. Anyway, this is recorded. Say FIPRA stands for Centre Franco-Indien pour la Recherche Avancée. In English, it would be Indo-French Center for the Promotion of Advanced Research. And this is extremely interesting mechanism because it provides collaborative scientific research grants. You have two submissions per year, 2 deadlines per year, and the funding is quite attractive, 150,000 to 200,000 for 3-year program. And this is basic research, meaning you have one scientist in your institution, you can find a collaborator in France and then apply for that. But if you have an idea where industrial partnership can be also clubbed in, then you have industry academia research partnership. The funding is similar, and this we call it as 2+2, meaning you have one industrial partner in India and your French academic partner also has an industrial partner. That becomes 2+2, and this is very interesting mechanism. And for your students, please do talk about the Raman Sharpak Scholarship. And these are doctoral stays in France, and who are already the students who are already doing doctorate, and they can avail of this. And they have attractive stipends. Up to 6 months they can stay. Per month is 1,500 euros, which is decent. They have to get an invitation from a lab, meaning the students have to write to the French labs, and if the PI accepts, then there is one deadline every year, sometime in springtime. So please encourage your students to do part of their PhD, and that also bridges the between the two labs. This is a very interesting mechanism. So let me talk a few words about CNRS, because that is the organization I represent in India. And if you had not heard of CNRS, this is an organization that was created in 1939. The World War II had just begun. Germany had just invaded Poland, but then the French people had already decided that they would start this organization called CNRS. Earlier it had a slightly different name. And the founder, or at least the one who gave the idea, was Jean Perrin, a Nobel laureate himself. He said there is probably war going on, but the mobilization of the French laboratories through CNRS will also amount to the creation of a new regiment in terms of war. And so science was important, and they did not stop the idea of creating this institution. In CNRS, we do science, and we do science in practically every domain. Every domain. There is no domain that we don't cover. Physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology, informatics, engineering, social sciences, and humanities. Every science we cover. And what the reason for my mentioning is that if you have an idea, and if you find a CNRS partner to work with, you have ways of working with CNRS. CNRS is good, as I said earlier. We publish over 55,000 publications per year. We are sixth in patent, and our annual budget is close to 4 billion euros. And there are quite a few people, scientists, including myself, and we have 32,000 scientists in the organization. We are ranked first in the ERC, Nature, and Schemago ranking. And within CNRS itself, CNRS system, we have 12 Fields Medals and 22 Nobel laureates. Gerard Mourou got the Nobel in 2018. We are talking about C.V. Raman, so in physics. So just my respects to C.V. Raman here. Despite this, it is possible that many of you might not have heard of CNRS, and we are trying to bridge the gap. And therefore, CNRS, although 100% French organization, research organization now, of course, we have collaborations all over the world, but we have made it more official in terms of having an office in North America, South America, and in Brussels itself, and South Africa, and we have an office in New Delhi, Beijing, Tokyo, Singapore, and more recently in Melbourne. And I represent, or I'm the director of the CNRS office in New Delhi. And we work with most research organizations in India. We have with CSIR, I guess, I mean, you know about CSIR. So we have an ongoing agreement with CSIR, with the Department of Science and Technology, with the DBT that I'm sure you know about it, Department of Biotechnology, with ICERS, and with NCBS in Bangalore and Indian Institute of Science Bangalore also. So we have already established strong collaborations, and we publish quite a bit with the Indian scientists. But if you have not started in your institution, it's time to start. And the way it works is you can start with an exploring with the CNRS scientist, which is a 2-year project, or you can consolidate that once you have already explored, and if you have already published and started working together, and they have had some exchanges, then you can work on 2 other schemes, which are called International Research Network or research programs. These are 5-year research projects. And if you have consolidated and you want to build a much stronger, then it is possible. And there the funding is more attractive. Whereas for here in these 2 systems, funding is essentially for meeting, mobility, organizing workshops, and to get to know each other better, start working. And here is where you start working actually. But these are very attractive, and quite a few Indians and French people are working together. One other scheme is, one most attractive scheme is, once this has established very well, then you can practically have a CNRS center in your institution, and which means you are eligible for all the benefits that CNRS lab in France would have. So these are interesting. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. Some of the examples that are already ongoing, for example, I told you here, exploring. So I give examples for those: exploring, consolidating, or structuring kind of joint units. These are some of the international emerging actions that are ongoing. And we have several, about 10 or 12 right now, and then others are on the way of international research programs. These are 5-year research programs on various research projects. Quite a few involved. Actually, there's one in NCL, which is a CSIR lab. And in fact, Srivari Chandrasekhar, who is now the DST secretary, is the head of another international research project of CNRS in Hyderabad IICT. So these are just examples of such research programs. And these are more powerful collaborations. We have one in Bangalore in mathematics, and another one is mathematics and informatics in Chennai. And here they practically is like they enjoy all the benefits of CNRS lab. CNRS scientists work here. They are here most of the times there, and then scientists from India also go to CNRS labs in France. So this is a very powerful means of collaboration. And we have two very special situations also, because you might have heard about Pondicherry being the past colony of French people. There is an affinity for Pondicherry. So there is a very interesting institution, Institut Français de Pondicherry in Pondicherry. And this covers social sciences and humanities, and also in New Delhi, it's called CSH, Centre de Sciences Humaines et Sociales. Then this is in Delhi, right where I sit next to my office. But we also work very closely with the industry. Either we promote the research through consultancy or training or tech transfer partnerships and creation of startups, or helping the mobility between back and forth, between the industry and CNRS labs. So these are some mechanisms of how how we can work. And I'll not go into this particular congratulatory note from Professor Vijay Raghavan, whom you might have heard of, principal scientific advisor. And he gave a congratulatory note when we celebrated the 80th anniversary. And of course, you also know Professor Shekhar Mande, who also sent us a congratulatory note. These are all on the websites of CNRS. And here I stop the part on collaboration and the mechanism, how to collaborate with France and with the European Union and CNRS. Now I'll switch the gears to a small extent. So here we will be talking about the societal challenges. You remember earlier I mentioned about the societal challenges like health issues, demographic changes, climate change, and all these issues. And I'll take one example and take you through for the next 15-20 minutes of the research that we are doing in my lab. And at least part of it is very, very relevant for us all. And before that, I would like to thank my colleagues who are either PhD students or postdocs or technicians or international scientists working in my lab. Chavdar is from Bulgaria, June from South Korea, and Momo from Senegal. And we have Indians, obviously, Mohan Madhur from Madhur, which is in Karnataka, Jagdish here, and Vani, she is in IIT now. Jagdish is the head of biotechnology and biological sciences in IIT Palakkad, and Vani is in IIT. She finished her PhD and came back to India. She is an assistant professor in IIT Madras. And at any given time point, we have 7-8 Indian students. Today, we are not seeing them. And Anna Maria is from Colombia. So it's an international group in my lab, and I quite enjoy that. And for those people who have traveled to France, to Paris, this is Jardin du Luxembourg. and which is the Senate building. And on this side, on the right side here, we have I'll come back to that anyway. We have a Notre Dame and other very interesting monuments. We will talk about Paris some other time. So I'd also like to thank all my clinician colleagues, because I'd like to, most of the questions that I ask in my lab are highly clinically oriented, direct relevance to medicine. So this slide, I beg your pardon, this is the only very highly scientific, or it may be a little bit tricky. Stay with me. This will take about 1 minute, and don't worry about if you don't remember all the technical details, but it is just important for us to know as it lays the platform. See, as you're sitting there in Dehradun or in London or wherever we are, you are confronted with immunological challenges, and we learned a lot about the challenges over the last 2 years, particularly with with coronavirus. And at any given point, you are confronted. And when those organisms come, the immune system tackles that very quickly. And for that, we have what is called innate immune system. You heard in your high school, actually, I'm sure you have learned it in high school, where they said, oh, tears, saliva, the mucus, the hair, the cilia, all this stops the viruses, fungus, bacteria to enter into your body. Yes, they work very well. And if it doesn't stop, if it's not able to stop the infection, then we have a more specialized immune system called adaptive immune system, or adaptive immune compartment, where we have specialized cells called phagocytes. I'm sure you have heard of these phagocytes. They engulf the bacteria or the virus and show it to T cells. And the T cells are a bunch of lymphocytes that are part of the white blood corpuscles that you must have read about when you were in high school or college. And these T cells are very specialized in tackling some infections. So they differentiate into different subtypes. We'll not go into that right now. But then I'm sure you have heard of antibodies. And these T cells actually provide the support for B cells, and the B cells are the other bunch of lymphocytes, and they make antibodies. Over the last 2 years, I'm sure almost every day we heard about antibodies, either because of infection or because of your vaccination, how antibodies are important. Antibodies are very specific. If imagine this coronavirus or any bacteria or fungus has already reached your lungs, what these antibodies shown in the Y-shaped form, it's just a representative form of the antibody. It recognizes the pathogen. The moment the antibody recognizes the pathogen, it sets in a whole chain of immunological reaction. Neutrophils, complement, macrophages. Don't worry. If you don't remember all these names, doesn't matter. What is important is the recruitment of all these components. The challenge is to get rid of the pathogen, and it works. Most of the times it works. If not, the T cells also start secreting obnoxious molecules. The objective here is to get rid of the pathogen, and that works to perfection. And sometimes if there is a small cell that has become cancerous, the immune system makes sure that it works. If it's a virus infected cell, the immune system ensures that the very cell that is infected is removed. All this works in a very concerted manner and works to perfection. And this, it's so powerful that you also have a bonus. You have memory cells, because once you get an infection, the memory cells, they recognize, they remember. And in case you are infected again, these jump into action and kill the pathogen very quickly. And this is actually the mechanism behind the vaccination program. But in some people, this particular immune system may be defective. There are children that are born without some of the components, and they are immunodeficient. They cannot combat the day-to-day infection. And such kids, they have to survive within a bubble. And you must have heard of bubble babies. And I'm paying respects to the first clinical trial of a gene therapy to treat such a disease by a French scientist called Alain Fischer. And so you have, when there is no, or one of the components is missing, it's immunodeficiency. But I'm sure you also have heard of some exaggerated immune response that leads to allergy. You must have heard about all those allergens. Oh, I'm allergic to peanuts, I'm allergic to house dust, I'm allergic to eggs and things like that. And that is an unwanted immune response to those particular components. But then there are some times when the immune system is misdirected. Instead of combating or fighting against the infection, this very powerful immune system can target your own pancreas. And the same powerful immune system, instead of destroying the bacteria or the fungus or virus, it starts destroying your own pancreas. Then what happens? Then you end up with destruction of pancreas and end up with diabetes. And if the target organ is joints, you have arthritis. If the target organ is brain, you may have multiple sclerosis and such deadly diseases, because the immune system is very potent. It can destroy these organs. That's not good. Anyways, before I go on, I'll ask you to sit back if you have not understood anything, because I'm sure you are fast and furious. You have understood. My story is very slow and laid back. Take it easy. Just listen to what this story for the next another 10 minutes or so. I don't know how I'm doing in terms of time. You can give me a small signal if I'm going. See, if you look back over the last 70 or so years, what happened was many of the infectious diseases, we controlled them: hepatitis, rheumatic fever, measles, mumps, tuberculosis, to a great extent. But if you extrapolate other diseases on this very scheme, then you see that other diseases like multiple sclerosis, diabetes, asthma, Crohn's disease, allergies, they all started going up, including cancers. So what happened? On one hand, we controlled, thanks to antibiotics and other drugs, we controlled the emergence of these infectious diseases. But at the same time, we started looking at the emergence of other new diseases, or at least exaggeration of these diseases. So what did we do? If you look at the world, geoepidemiology, in fact, this is a picture I like to show. Imagine the world in the night. So what you have here is either in America or in Europe or Japan, some parts of India or China, it's lit up, right? Meaning they have money, they can turn the lights on even during the entire night. Whereas some other parts which are less economically favored have no lights, which means economically they're not able to sustain this. There is no electricity, or you can use any other analogy. But if you extrapolate or overlap that with the diseases, all those rich countries have the emergence of these new immune disorders that I just now explained to you: allergy, autoimmune diseases, and cancer. So what is that relation? What is that inverse relation? One thing is extremely clear. A study done on 600,000 cancers among parents and 92,000 among offsprings, a beautiful study done from 58 all the way up to 96. You know what it showed? It showed that it's not the genetic component which is important. It is the environment that will tilt your susceptibility towards cancer. That is dramatic. And therefore, environment is something that I'm interested in. Environment is something that is extremely crucial. So what did we do? What happened to our environment? It was such a beautiful world. See, what happened is we changed. I don't know how many Indians here sitting in your room have played gilli danda or played like this in the ponds. We were very close to nature, and we were, getting this natural resistance. But over the last, I don't know, maybe 20, 30, 40 years, this is what has happened. On the left, you have the Amazon forest. And this is a typical street in any major city. It could be Delhi, it could be Rio de Janeiro, it could be Shanghai or any other major city. And the kids, look at those kids playing gilli danda versus those who are all the time in front of the lifestyle. It has changed dramatically. There has been a lot of change, but there's more to it. This is one way of looking at the environment. We were very close to the environment. We spoiled the environment. We polluted the environment. We, spoiled our own environment of, being with others. But there's more to it. And that is actually, this is all what I described now is an external environment. But, even if you're sitting in, Dehradun or in London or something, as you're sitting, you have had your breakfast or lunch, the body is working and at any given time, your internal environment is secreting and producing thousands and thousands of molecules. And it's these molecules are very important. And so any change in this environment can lead to a disease. So it's not only the external environment, but even the internal environment is equally important. So this is what I mean by environment. It is not just the beautiful garden where Rajesh Khanna is running after Sharmila Tagore or Shah Rukh Khan running after somebody else. No, there's more to it. There's more to it because see what happened back in 1796, hundreds of years ago. Edward Jenner first found out the vaccine against pox, you must have remembered. Louis Pasteur conceived the vaccination against rabies, anthrax, and then more later in 20s, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. Thanks to all this, as I told you earlier, we controlled many infections. And even I wanted to change the world. And I joined this veterinary college back in 1970s, early 70s. And then this is the type of pants that we have. You guys are not very stylish. We were very stylish. We used to have pants that were sweeping the floor half of the town. So anyways, in 80s, I landed on one cold October morning, a drizzling, almost depressive morning. Nobody noticed that I came. And then I started doing research in Pasteur Institute. And luckily, I met this person. And I don't think you're looking at the right person. Yeah, I met Michel Kazatchkin, and Michel is a fantastic immunologist. And we started looking at a systems biology approach to study the immune system. And we knew that genetic component of an individual is very important. And we knew that immune regulation is done by many molecules and cells. But what is important is the environment and how a change in the environment can tilt your immune function to a dysfunction and lead to diseases. So over to 2000s, all these people that I mentioned, for example, 300 years ago, 200 years ago, Louis Pasteur, Fleming, they all had good intentions. But what happened was we either over-vaccinated or abused antibiotics. And when we abuse the antibiotics, something dramatic happens in your body. Something dramatic happens in your environment, both external and internal. And that is the message I would like to leave you with today. That environment is called a microbial ecosystem. Microbial ecosystem means all the millions of bugs that you have in your body right now. You think that you are a handsome or a beautiful person, but you are beautiful or handsome thanks to this thousands and thousands of billions and billions of bacteria. These are all good bacteria that are in your system. That makes you your individual. You think you are one individual, but actually you are millions of other bugs or these microorganisms that make you as an individual. When you look at your beautiful face, then this is what you look, but actually it is this that makes you an interesting, healthy human being. And we should not disturb that. And that's what is the study all about microbiome. The key word is microbiome. I'll not go into the details, but in the last 20, 30 years, enormous research has been going on. And we know the different types of microbes that are there. And we have studied, and we know the relation between this and the diseases. We did not, this is a data from 2014, I should renew this slide, but a disturbance in your microbial ecosystem, I repeat, a disturbance in your microbial ecosystem, either because of your habits or because of overuse of antibiotics, can cause diabetes, allergy, autoimmune diseases, cardiovascular diseases, many other diseases. And this is not just a correlation, there is a strong argument, evidence in favor of this dysbiosis. So here I will not go into the details. One, I have no time, and two, it may become too technical. When you take antibiotics over a period of time, a healthy this healthy component is this on the left side. Gradually, when you take antibiotics, you deplete your immune system. You deplete your gut of this flora, and this is something I'll spare the data. I'll spare the details of this particular one because we are just showing here that a healthy immune system or healthy gut flora has a variety of microorganisms like this. And when you treat antibiotics, it becomes depleted, completely depleted, and you have only few that are left, and that's not good. And look at this particular situation where the animals for beef or for meat, the pigs, or they are treated non-stop with antibiotics. And what happens is, these are, of course, they produce good meat, but then your meat that you're eating comes also with a good dose of antibiotics. And this either in your plant, in your tomatoes, or in your eggs, or in your meat, there are non-stop. You are actually treating yourself even unknowingly with antibiotics every day, and that is not good. And very last week, 19th of February, we got this beautiful report in Nature paper saying that antibiotics after birth affects the gut microbes. Because what happens, as soon as the baby is born, and if the baby has a small ear infection or some small cough or other infections, immediately we start treating the baby with antibiotics, and that depletes the baby's gut flora of your microbes that are essential. The gut flora that has come from the mother is depleted, and that is not good. So one long back, Alexander Fleming, when he discovered penicillin, he had already said that a time may come when you go and buy across the desk, just go to your Arogya Lakshmi, Bhagya Lakshmi or pharmacy or somewhere and ask, oh, please give me antibiotics. And you start taking antibiotics like that. And this is the result. You become resistant to antibiotics. And resistance to antibiotics is probably one of the most dreadful situations that you can end up with. What has happened? This is what has happened over the last 40, 50 years. Before 40, we had only passive immunizations. There was no antibiotics. Of course, people were dying of infections. There were difficult situations. And post-antibiotics, this is what happened. Major endemics were controlled. Cholera, salmonellosis, tuberculosis, as I told you, many diseases in rich countries, because they had money. They had antibiotics, they treated. But they abused. So when you abuse antibiotics, then you develop resistance. But that's in rich countries. But in poor countries, the major endemics remained because all of them did not have access to the antibiotics and drugs. So they continued to have major endemics. But those who had antibiotics, those who had the means of using the antibiotics, they did the same mistake as the rich countries, and they ended up with a double bonus. You have opportunistic pathogens plus all the other immune disorders. And this is a dreadful situation we are living in. And projections have shown, modeling have shown that in Asia, by 2050, about 5 million people will unfortunately die because there will not be any drugs to treat them. And the same situation elsewhere in the world. And this is not nice. This is not a good news. So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to change this whole system? First, absolute judicious use of antibiotics. Do not use antibiotics unnecessarily. Do use to complete the course so that they don't just get used to the antibiotics. Or go for probiotics in your food. There are so many ways of having your yogurt, your natural food, and these are rich in probiotics, healthy habits. Or in fact, when we were children, we lived with them. We lived with these helminths. Most of us, in those who are born in, let's say, 50s and 60s, we used to treat these helminths and we remove them. But now we know that over killing of these has caused problems. Now it's the world other way around. They have started treating such diseases by giving the worms, because it tilts your immune system the other way. Or actually fecal transplant. You know what fecal material is. I'm sorry, I'll not go into the details. But if an individual is depleted of a particular microbial gut flora, then you practically transplant the fecal material from a healthy human to the diseased human. You know what this means. So do we have to get there? Or as I said in Indore a few years ago, bachon ko gilli danda khelne do. Let them play with nature. Let them get used to these little bugs right from the beginning. or sitting in front of the computer or in the cell phone doesn't help much, or having 2 times or 3 times a shower is not necessarily a good idea. Overuse of detergents is not necessarily a good idea. Let the kids get used to these pathogens. Let's go back to a simple, innocent life like this. So we have to normalize this, and I'll stop here by showing one representation. Your homeostasis, or your well-being, your good immune system, let's say, or your good digestive system, is everything is perfect, like your perfect day today in Dehradun, or where I am sitting in Alps, for example, out there, I'm sitting in the Alps. It's a perfect day, but things can go wrong even on a perfect day, and that happens because of a disturbance, either over abuse of antibiotics or some infections that are not controlled, as it happened in case of corona. And so you don't want to curb by using antibiotics all the time. Make sure that you have a healthy way of living and bringing back to homeostasis. And I'd like to stop here. I don't know how much time I took, and I'd like to thank all my colleagues once again. Shiva, Pushpa, Sebastian, and these are from Indian Care, Jagdish, as I told, Mohan, and all my colleagues. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry if I took too much time, and I can take questions later on, maybe. Or no, it's better to take the questions because I'm not sure of my connectivity. So may I end my presentation here? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kaveri. Perfect timing, exactly on the dot of 3 p.m. India. So we can certainly take a couple of questions. If there's any on the YouTube chat, you won't be able to see them here. So
No,
do you
yeah.
have any questions in the YouTube chat? There's a whole lot. There's a lot of chat traffic there. There's a lot of chat traffic there, but I don't see any questions as such.
Okay, no problem.
Let me ask you one question.
Yes, please.
It was a very thought-provoking talk. So I won't talk about the, oops, we just lost him. He said, yes, please, and he vanished.
Sorry, I had lost you. I'm with you. Yeah.
You're back. No, so the question I had for you was that given the fact that probably the people who are now in their 40s, 50s, and 60s have been through the high antibiotic prescription regimes that were common in the 80s, 90s, and first decade of the new millennium, what are the opportunities to restore towards homeostasis for people like that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm in that bracket. Maybe you two are close to that bracket. So the one is to make sure that you don't have to depend on antibiotics anymore, unless it's a very serious infection which cannot be controlled. Also, otherwise you don't have to. And the doctors these days, they know. But otherwise, very simple, straightforward, solution is to get back your probiotics, meaning your healthy eating habits and healthy food habits, healthy exercise. And this is something that everyone has already, if you go to the WhatsApp University, the University of WhatsApp, you get messages like this and the coaching classes every morning. I'm not saying that you have to follow everything. What ideally there will be probably soon the substitutes for antibiotics, so we don't have to depend on the antibiotics. There are small molecules that are coming, small peptides are coming, so analogs are coming up. So one is to avoid the antibiotics. Two, make sure that your food, essentially, your food is one of the major, in the environment, of course, there's a lot of pollution. Those things, there's not much. You are lucky to be in Dehradun, but people who are living in Delhi and bigger cities in London or in Paris, it's a different story. So pollution, if there's not much you can do, at least make sure your internal environment is good, meaning a proper food with appropriate probiotics, and avoid those meats, etc., which may be commercial. This is the reason why this bio or organic food is coming up again. So yeah, there are more and more such challenges, scientists and innovations are also done to make sure that your immune homeostasis and homeostasis can be maintained. I'll stop here. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Kaveri. Really, really enjoyable talk. I think a lot of deep and practical insights there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Let me
and if
go.
you wish to, write to me about the collaborative mechanisms, and I'm more than open. That's very important, useful for your colleagues.
We will surely do.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah.
In fact, the former director of FIPRA has just rejoined CSIR just a couple of months ago.
Oh, Shekhar. No, sorry, former director. Okay, Mukesh.
Purnima Rupal.
Purnima Rupal. Yes, she has come back. Yes.
Just so let us move on to Professor Manmohan Singh Sodhi, FIMA, FORS, and a string of other degrees and accolades to his name. Professor Sodhi is professor in the Operations Supply Chain Management Group at the Bayes Business School, which was formerly Cass Business School of the City University of London. He works on risk and sustainability in supply chains. That is an area close to my personal heart. And he's one of the leading scholars in the world based on his publications and citations. Professor Sodhi received his PhD in management science from the Anderson School at the University of California at Los Angeles in 1994. Subsequently, he taught operations management at the Ross School at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And his research in the trucking industry over there was funded by the Sloan Foundation. Prior to that, he and I were contemporaries at IIT Delhi, where he did his BTech in mechanical engineering. And in between, he spent time at a software company in San Jose as vice president and director for enterprise e-business strategy at Saint, and as manager in the supply chain practice at Accenture. A lot of his work in supply chain is things that I've referred to during my own work in supply chain during the recent pandemic. As you know, my IIP colleagues know, I've been working on managing the COVID-19 pandemic supply chain in India, especially in CSIR's response. His work has covered industries across consumer electronics, chemicals, petroleum, hospitality industry, procurement, and airlines. I think the big question that will be up at the top of many people's minds this week is, what supply chain ripple effects are we expecting to see from Ukraine? We are also wondering about what are the long-term supply chain disruptions of the pandemic, and what does all this do to the carbon footprint of supply chains? Because very centralized supply chains will have a higher carbon footprint, but a higher efficiency. So how does one actually determine how sustainable a supply chain is? I hope that in Professor Sodhi's talk, we will hear some insights in these areas, but even if not, it is such a vast subject that it is a pleasure to have him on board, and over to him for his talk.
Thank you for those kind words, Anjan. Let me just get my slides up. Okay. Am I okay, Anjan?
Yes, looks great.
Okay.
Yours?
So thanks once again for those kind words, Anjan. I'm not going to talk about the Ukraine and Russia situation. I'm hoping that will be resolved very quickly. So for me, the important thing is the long-term issue of preparedness against what we experienced recently with this COVID pandemic. But there'll be others coming up, and there are always disasters. And it is quite interesting that the frequency of such disasters is growing. So maybe we don't have to wait that long for the next one. So therefore, preparedness becomes quite important. So here's the problem, which we've seen in every country around the world, that pandemics and national level health emergencies in general, they can completely overwhelm the system. Whatever health system there is, in the UK we have the NHS, in India it's a private and public mixed, in the US mostly private. Whatever the system gets completely overwhelmed, I mean, and the result is, of course, there's lots of deaths. Right now, the estimate based in February 2022 is that in the last 2 years, we've lost 20 million people. And this is based on excess deaths calculations. This is quite a toll. Of course, the economies of many countries have been shattered. Now, of course, they'll be building up, but the building up also has created problems and therefore slowed down the recovery. And it doesn't matter whether it's UK, US, India, China. There is the economics, of course, then produces public dissatisfaction. We've seen protests here in London, and Professor Kaveri has seen protests in Paris against the government, anti-vaxxers and so on. Also, there is distrust of government because Dr. Kaveri referred to WhatsApp University. That creates rumors, but those rumors have pseudo-scientific basis sometimes. But in general, there is this long-term health problem coming from COVID. We call it long COVID, but also the long-term economic problems. Parts of the economy have shifted. Auto industry, for example, has continuing problems. So the solution for this problem of preparedness, clearly every country in the world was unprepared. Or it may have been prepared somewhat, but overall at the national level, forget the global level, we were hopeless and still continue to remain hopeless. But even at the national level, it doesn't matter how rich or poor a country was, they were hopelessly underprepared. So the solution is going back to what Professor Kaveri, Dr. Kaveri was talking about, that the body has different levels of preparation, the skin, and then, of course, the immune system and so on. So what I'm presenting is a very simple idea for three-tiered preparedness system. So on the right, you see an unanticipated demand surge. This could be demand for oxygen, as you saw in many cities in India during the peak COVID time. It could be the demand for ventilators. Again, we saw that in the US and UK. So that unanticipated demand surge because of a pandemic or because of some other national health emergency, that can be met out of inventory, ready-made inventory that's already there, and that many hospitals will also have inventory. It'll be met from there. But at the second tier, from that is capacity to create inventory. Now, this capacity has to be domestic because if it's a global pandemic, other countries cannot supply you the goods. And again, we've seen that during COVID. So can you have capacity? And it doesn't matter that the cost of domestic capacity is much more than what you might buy from some other country, but still having that capacity is a second tier. And the third tier I'll talk about is capability. So capability means having the wherewithal to create the capacity that will make the inventory of the goods needed. So three-tier system, and the science or the maths we need for this is fairly simple, as I will show. It's something called the news vendor model. And this is how it would work. If there was a global or a national level public health emergency, we would use inventory to meet that need. And in fact, most years, so we are really talking every year, most years, the demand would be quite small and it would be met from inventory. In some years, if we are talking about a 3-decade horizon, as many pharma companies do when they talk about pandemics, because we expect there would be a major pandemic every 30 years or so. So for, I guess, large epidemics where inventory is not enough, we would use capacity after the inventory has been used up. We would use capacity to make that inventory. And finally, of course, very rarely when you have a national level emergency like we saw with COVID in around the world in all countries, then of course you would start translating capability, national level capability, to start creating the capacity, which in turn would be used to make inventory. So this is I've come to the conclusion of my talk before presenting the things. So when it comes to inventory, the US has a simple model, and in the US there are strategic stockpiles for many things, for petroleum, for minerals, and so on, just in case there is disruption from outside. So similarly, for public health, national level public health emergencies, there is the US Strategic National Stockpile. And this was created in the early 2000s when COVID version 1, then called SARS coronavirus 1, had come up, and it was felt there was a threat that there might be much bigger pandemics in the future, and therefore there should be a strategic stockpile of PPE suits, of these antibiotics Dr. Kaveri talked about, of ventilators. Particularly, ventilators are is an expensive piece of equipment, having ventilators. And the budget, for example, for 2019 was 600 million. And a broad range of different medicines, pharmaceuticals, PPE suits. They are stored in warehouses. These are not publicly disclosed locations for obvious reasons, but they are in strategic locations around the country. And in case there is a national level public health emergency, then the goods can be shipped by truck to any city within 12 hours. So that's the idea of having just inventory. The question then, of course, is how much inventory should you have? And this is where this particular mathematical model, which is very simple actually, called the news vendor calculation, that is used to find out what would be the minimum expected total cost to have an inventory which serves up to a certain percentage. For example, if you were a company and you wanted to meet customer demand, you would say, okay, depending, of course, on the industry, for many industries, it might be 95% level of demand that you can service within the time you are given. Some other industries might go for 98% or 99%. So that's called service level. So it's the same idea for service level, except we are looking at national level public health emergencies. So given that we don't know what the demand will be next year for this demand, meaning the need stemming from a public health emergency next year, so we have to figure out what percentile or what service level are we going to choose, whether 95%, 98%, and how do we calculate that? And that calculation will come from minimizing the expected cost. On one hand, you need to buy inventory and store it. On the other hand, if you don't have enough, there will be people dying or people who are otherwise affected, and there's a cost per person for that. And different countries have different cost of what is a human life. I know it sounds very crass to talk about life in terms of rupees and pounds, but you do need to make that calculation as to how much cost you're willing to absorb by not having. Of course, if you value human life at a very high cost, that just means that percentile or service level moves to a higher number, 95, 98, and so on. And remember, this is a probabilistic calculation in the sense we don't know what the next year demand is going to be, or next 10 years what the demand is going to be. We are just trying to choose a service level or a percentile. So if we look at past data, my data is okay. It's not brilliant here, but still, if we look at past few decades, you can see there's been occasional peaks of the number of people affected. H1N1 keeps coming back. So does coronavirus, actually. Coronavirus, this graph doesn't go all the way back to the Spanish flu, but that's is coronavirus. And then when we had COVID-1, now we can call it SARS-1, just like the present pandemic we call SARS-2. SARS-1 in 2002, 2004, which actually motivated the U.S. Strategic National Stockpile. And then you see the swine flu, H1N1, come up again. So you can see that the higher peaks are getting rarer. And in fact, if we take all that data and make it into a probability distribution, this is a cumulative probability distribution. So it goes from 0 all the way up to 1. And if you pick up any size, let's say n, saying the number of people affected less than 1 million, a number of people affected more than 1 million, then that probability will keep shrinking as long as you pick up a large number. But it doesn't go all the way to 0, obviously. So even a simple formula like this, an exponential distribution, gives a pretty good match as to what's the number of people who might be, what's the probability that a certain number of people or more will be affected in a given year. And you'll see that this vanishingly, this exponential decaying probability is why we can, why we should have a 3-tiered system. So that's really the logic I'm trying to say. So supposing all we had was inventory, just like in the US Strategic National Stockpile, then how do we calculate the inventory? We can look at the purchasing cost, we can look at the holding cost, we can look at the cost of not meeting demand, which means letting people be affected. And of course, the number of people getting affected will go down dramatically because the probabilities, as you saw in the, let me bring up that previous slide, as you saw, more the people are affected, the probability becomes much smaller. So the top curve is the expected total cost. And you can see where it's minimized, and that gives you your stockpile, how much inventory you should keep in your stockpile. So this is a classic news vendor calculation. And in this case, using some numbers for ventilators, what the calculation comes out is 88th percentile of the demand. That means I should be able to meet up to 88% of the demand for any given year. Of course, most years the demand will be, my inventory will be far more than the demand, but in some years, the demand will actually be more than my inventory, and that's the cost I have said I'm willing to bear by choosing a percentile like 88th percentile. Now, how did we do with this stockpile idea? It turned out to be a disaster in the US, at least. First of all, there was a shortage of ventilators. It was found that the number of ventilators were actually far less than whatever percentile you could compute and whatever was needed. So there were only 12,700 ventilators, even though just before peak, the perceived need was something like 90,000. And many of these, there were questions whether they were working or not. And even if they were working, whether when you send a complicated piece of equipment like a ventilator to some hospital, whether the people there would have the training to be able to use it effectively. Because these ventilators were from many different makers. The second thing was many of these PPE suits that were found to have already been expired or otherwise unusable. So you store something for 10 years, 20 years. Obviously, if you're not looking at it every year, it's quite possible that it's expired because everything, not many medical things will have 20-year expiration date. So they would have expired or otherwise become unusable. Who knows? Rats may have eaten something. And of course, having different governments change over time, and different governments may have different priorities, and not every government may have put in the same amount of funds in maintaining that inventory over those 20 odd years. So what this is the classic case that the holding cost of inventory is actually much more than what you might think. Just keeping inventory for 1 year is a different matter from keeping inventory for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, because you don't know when the next pandemic will strike. So the solution to that is, again, comes from inventory, is rather than having inventory, why not have some inventory and then some backup capacity? And you use the backup capacity to make fresh inventory if you run out of your first line of defense, which was the inventory you already have. That way, if you have smaller amount of inventory, that inventory will get used rapidly, and therefore you won't have expiration, but also you won't have the costs of not having inventory because you would have the capacity to manufacture new inventory. So here again, we do the same calculation, except that now we will have a cost of reserving capacity. So let's say if it's a question of ventilators, you go to the auto manufacturers and say, if we need inventory of ventilators in the future, we'll be coming to you. You just have to guarantee us that when we need it, you will give us this capacity, and we can pay you some rent over the years for guaranteeing that capacity. So that's called reserve cost. And also at that time, yes, you can charge a price, because obviously if you're an auto manufacturer now, you're suddenly making ventilators. The cost of manufacture will be much higher than if you were importing ventilators from China or some other country. But that's okay, as long as we know what that price will be. It might be twice as expensive or 3 times as expensive, and that's okay. So supposing it's twice as expensive, even then we'll see that we will have some inventory. That's 1 percentile. So service level up to say 60% is met by inventory. And then service level of up to say, we were talking about 88th percentile. Now we might be able to do 95th percentile and say we'll meet up to the 95th percentile by these capacity contracts with auto manufacturers or whoever. So this is a trade-off between between this backup manufacturing capacity. So it's not that you need to create ventilator plants, but you need to have capacity somewhere in the supply chains. Auto companies, maybe auto companies with licenses from ventilator manufacturers, and the license allows them to manufacture only under these circumstances where there is a national level health emergency. Otherwise, ventilators would be easily available and you can buy them at much lower cost. So the more manufacturing capacity you have, then the less inventory you need to keep. So for example, for the calculation, same numerical example, the inventory you need is only 52nd percentile, which means roughly the median. So that means half of the years you will have enough inventory, half of the years you would have to use some backup capacity. And that's a much better deal, because for those half of those years in this 20, 30, 40-year horizon, you'll be using that inventory pretty much every year. So there is no question of inventory having been eaten by rats or becoming expired or becoming unusable. And you have the confidence of knowing that you have this backup capacity. Now, so the inventory you need for the stockpile will be much less, and that inventory will get cycled, used up very often. So no issues of inventory getting expired or being not being unusable. So the intuition behind this is quite simple, actually. This is, again, the probability that the demand or the number of people affected exceed a certain limit keeps growing, keeps decreasing exponentially. So it's very small proportion of years where the demand might be quite high. So then in carrying inventory becomes very expensive, but having this optional capacity or backup capacity with options on it or whatever. And by the way, this is not merely theoretical. Electronics industry, this is quite a standard practice where you reserve capacity because demand in electronics industry tends to be quite uncertain. So you reserve capacity and you use it only when it's needed. In fact, the first instance goes back to at least 2,000 years, where a Greek philosopher made this kind of reserve capacity options on olive crops. There was before the olive oil thing, before the olives were to be harvested, he felt it might be a good harvest this year, so he reserved capacity on all olive presses and made a bundle. So anyway, so reserve capacity is not a notional idea. It is actually used in different sectors. So because the likelihood you'll need that capacity is very small, so the expected cost of using reserve capacity, even though the manufacturing cost might be much higher than what you might normally buy a ventilator for, therefore you'll get a much lower expected cost, and yet you will also be able to serve more people in case of a public health emergency. The reality, unfortunately, was in the US and in the UK, where I am, there were attempts to go to the auto industry in conjunction with the ventilator manufacturers to start creating such capacity. And the same thing, Hanes, as you know, if you buy your underwear, Hanes is a company that makes underwear. They tried to make masks, but a key component there was this non-woven fabric, which is glass fiber. That fiber wasn't made in the US because all the capacity had shifted to China a long time ago. So they were just reduced to making very basic masks. Same thing with the auto industry. They were eventually able to make only very basic ventilators, which were not very useful for the medical industry. So they were made, of course, luckily the peak, by the time the companies managed to make those ventilators, the peak had already passed, and whatever toll was in the US was there. So the stockpile actually should have had full service ventilators, which can be used by any hospital, whether it's for children, whether it's for adults, but the basic ventilators are not very good. So the thing that we have to think about is if we are going to create this reserve capacity or backup capacity, we have to do it beforehand, not during a pandemic. Suddenly you start realizing, okay, come on. I remember this thing where the government in the UK said, come on, whoever can make it, please send us your idea. So it can't be done afterwards because there's a pandemic raging. So what we have to have is the same thing done beforehand. So identifying sectors and their capacity beforehand, just like electronics industry, they identify the manufacturers beforehand, they create contracts with reserve capacity, same idea. You contract for reserve capacity, you contract for unit cost of production, and you have to make sure that that capacity is available domestically. Because when there is a global pandemic going around, you're not going to get all the raw materials or components or equipment from a distant country, which would be having its own problems. And of course, given the geopolitics these days, you have to really watch out for where you're buying what. So and then over time, you have to keep buying small quantities regularly so that you make sure that these manufacturers are actually capable of making what they said they are making. Many times people say, bana lenge, koi problem nahi hai. But when you need it, then nothing shows up. So you have to keep buying these small quantities, even though at high prices, to make sure that the capacity is truly a backup capacity and is available when needed. So then idea number 3. So now that we're talking about capacity, let's go further and talk about capability. What do we need to create that domestic capacity? So that capability is something that will lower the capacity needed as well, because you'll have the capability to create capacity. So in a way, it's lower than serving from inventory or serving or making inventory from capacity. But just stay with me for a second on this idea that there is a notional capability, and that would be the 3rd tier. So again, you'll have different percentiles for inventory, capacity, and then capability. So what exactly is capability in that case? And that capability is, for example, having a private sector which invests in R&D, which the government has encouraged with the tax policies to help with innovation, and there is adequate competition so that companies realize that unless they compete with each other through better products, they're not going to survive domestically. And of course, many countries have public procurement. Whenever government procures something, there is some incentive for domestic content. But more than private sector, we should also look at what is an idea coming from English villages, the idea of commons. Commons in an English village is the area where anybody can go and feed their animals, because that common area is common to the village. And of course, if you are a very small farmer with a very small herd, then all such farmers can survive because of the commons. So same thing, in any society, the better the shape of the commons, then everybody survive. It's the tide that lifts all boats, as we say. If we have universities, engineering schools, and science departments, we have organizations such as CSIR, we have infrastructure, and we have designs that are created in the public domain so that industry can pick them up and make them. That kind of investment is what we call capability. And again, it can be shown even if the likelihood that capability becomes capacity is very small, and only then it creates capacity that produces very high cost. Even in these extreme circumstances, highly unfavorable circumstances, having capability still lowers the amount of capacity you need, because that capacity can be created. These are all probabilistic calculations, but again, having less capacity. So just like having capacity means you have less inventory needed, same thing, having capability means you need less capacity. So the implications for preparedness are that any country, and doesn't matter rich country, poor country, Asian country, European country, they need to invest in these industry commons. If you look at how the UK handled the pandemic, of course, there was the very sad loss of lots of deaths, but mostly in the 80+ age group. But the development of vaccines, the deployment of healthcare, everything came from either universities or the public sector. So in India, of course, CSIR and CSIR-IIP, they have played a very important role in creating that kind of infrastructure, which can then be used by the private sector. And Anjan had spoke earlier about making science get out of the lab and into the field. Well, this is what industry commons also includes. You have to create the essential science Dr. Kaveri was talking about, or excellent science, but we also need organizations like the CSIR to bring it closer to the people. So let me conclude by saying we need a 3-tier approach to preparedness. This is, we do need to prepare. The pandemics are coming, whether we like it or not. people are getting closer to animals as human populations go. We are getting older. Dr. Kaveri gave lots of reasons why we are becoming less immune. In the UK, there is worries because we've had two vaccines, one booster, and maybe another booster coming up, that we will lose or have decreased ability, just like with the microbes, same thing with the virus, that we'll lose or have reduced capacity for dealing with viruses in the future. And in fact, this coming flu season for winter is going to be quite interesting, because I think many people will get anti-flu vaccines because we don't have enough capacity to fight viruses now. Anyway, there will be future demand surges for pandemics, other national health emergencies, and it would be good if we start creating this three-tiered structure of inventory. Inventory is always there in hospitals and so on, but it cannot be enough to cover national level disasters. And certainly in India, we saw that with oxygen very visibly, not just ventilators. And then having the capacity to create backup capacity, and it doesn't have to be factories of ventilators, but it can be auto companies who have the idea how to convert capacity into their auto capacity into capacity for making ventilators. And then eventually any country needs to invest in capability. So there is a paper in Sloan Management Review, which I've written here. And in that paper, there is a link for a technical paper, which I put on ssrn.com website. Back to you, Anjan.
It was terrific. Really enjoyed that. Yeah. And I think particularly the fact that this was actually a very clear set of conclusions, yet born out of very rigorous modeling, is satisfying to see, because very often one believes that you can't have simplicity and rigor go together, but traditionally almost all great research has brought the two to a common platform. There's some, there are a lot of questions that come to mind because of the fact that you are really dealing with realms of ambiguity and trying to bring them down to actionable scenarios. So I think the key question that I would ask here is, you can plan for kind of known or anticipated black swan events like pandemics, right? But could you simultaneously plan for different sets of black swan events like pandemic and extreme climate?
Mm-hmm. That just depends on what you want to include in your probability distribution. And the probability distribution is that of the impact, whether it's climate or it's a pandemic or it's a war situation. India has a very interesting neighborhood, as you know. Either way, the impact will be number of people affected. And it's that probability distribution of number of people affected or the scenarios in probabilistic terms, that what you prepare for.
Yeah, that makes it simpler to understand. Thanks. Any other questions from my colleagues or in the chat box? Dr. Thackeray, Mr. Suryadev, anything?
So we have one question for Dr. Kaveri from, it states that, what should I do if my doctor suggests me strong dose of antibiotics? So what should be the course that I should follow?
See, if the doctor, I mean, we always have confidence in our doctors, right? This is their profession. They know what they're doing. So if the doctor feels that this particular situation needs antibiotics, and if the doctor prescribes very strong antibiotics, one thing that we have to ensure that you take the full course. As simple as that. You just, because what the tendency with most of us, I mean, 2 days, I mean, if the course is, let's say 5 days, 2 days later, we feel good. Hey, we are already good. We are feeling better. Why should we take antibiotics anymore? And that's a very common tendency. It's not anacin. It's not aspirin. It's not paracetamol. It's an antibiotic, extremely powerful drug. It is not the same as just a painkiller, so you have to respect that. The reason you have to respect that is, once it is possible that if you take just a short dose, I mean, if you don't complete the course, that is when the microorganisms, they get used to it. This is very well established. Therefore, if you have, there's an urgent need, there's a must, you have to take it. Yes, you take it, but respect the full course and make sure that you take immediately the probiotics, because most doctors these days, they prescribe also the probiotics together plus the vitamin B12, because when you deplete your gut flora completely, then your vitamin level goes down, B12 particularly, and therefore you have to make sure that along with the antibiotics, they prescribe the vitamins plus the probiotics. As simple as that. Voila.
Thank you, sir. Just one question from my side to Professor Sodhi. So it was really wonderful talk and a good overview of the supply chain management. Like as you have mentioned, that the pandemics or a situation like pandemics comes in almost a span of like 20 to 30 years. Decision making and managing inventory for such a situation is really a difficult thing to be judged and to be assessed. Should not a model on like this news vendor calculations be coupled up with the concepts of game theory, or be coupled up with the traveling salesman problem, so that a better idea or overview of such a situation can be assessed and analyzed?
You can always make a model more sophisticated, but really the key question is moving away from having inventory alone to having backup capacity and these capacity contracts, and then on to capability. And I'll go back to Anjan's question again. If we have capability, then it doesn't matter whether the effect came from climate change, whether it came from a particular pandemic, which was H1N1, or was it coronavirus, because capability is very general. Capacity is slightly general, and having just inventory is very specific. Now, inventory is very quantified number, and capacity is slightly less so, and capability is very loose. So it's not that we need sophisticated models, it's just that we need all those three things. And if you look at the technical paper that I put on SSRN, it shows that for capability, we've used a very simple idea, but it's enough to show what needs to be done. Eventually, it's about decision makers and not about the sophistication of the model itself. The modeling is actually very straightforward, because we teach that in even undergrad classes, this news vendor model. It's the idea of having general purpose, what Dr. Kaveri might say, immune system, and that is capability. And very simple models are enough in the news vendor calculations to be able to say how we move from inventory only to inventory and capacity, like with electronics industry, but going from backup capacity also to capability. Why should India have CSIR to begin with, right? It creates that capability, and you don't need a very fancy model to understand the valuable work CSIR is doing.
Thank you, sir.
I think no other questions, Dr. Thackeray?
That's it, sir. Yeah.
No.
Okay, you can please go ahead now and propose a vote of thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. We were just on time, and we're thankful to both of our speakers. They were really well time managed in their talks. So it has been indeed thought-provoking and interesting lectures from our speakers today, Dr. Sirini Kaveri and Professor Manmohan Sodhi. Dr. Kaveri, who discussed the mechanisms that will definitely help in developing sustainable collaborations between India and France or the European nations. The approach and the schemes that so you have discussed will definitely be helpful for my brethren at CSIR-IIP. We are all greatly indebted for your gracious presence today and by your talk. And also thanks for recalling all those games that we used to play in our childhood, be the gulli danda or playing with the glass marbles. Yeah, definitely our kids have forgotten them, and it's real time to get them recollected with all these things so that they develop more better and a strong immune system. It's really a privilege to hear Professor Manmohan Sodhi on this special day today. It's a lifetime opportunity, I would say, to listen to the faculty from the Bayes Business School. Pandemics are something intolerable and directly affect the economy and the entire supply chain management. Your talk, sir, is an eye-opener, and he gives a clear picture as to what should be our preparedness for such undue calamities. I, on behalf of entire CSIR family, thank both of you, sir, for sparing your valuable time from your busy schedule and sharing your experiences with us. You both had been very cooperative and agreed for the talk, even though there have been significant differences in the time zones that we are at present. It will be our pleasure, sir, to have both of you physically at our campus in the near future. We look forward for that. I also thank Director CSIR-IIP for the very concept and for selecting and inviting such outstanding speakers for this event today. You had always been cooperative and your support is priceless. My sincere thanks to all my fellow colleagues at CSIR-IIP and to all those who have joined this event virtually. We hope all of you must have gained significantly from today's program. So before we bid goodbye, I would request our speakers to kindly, they already have their cams on. I would request our IT in charge, Suri to kindly capture a pic for today's event so that we can share it or treasure it as a memory in future. Suri kindly capture a screenshot for it.
Done.
Thank you very much. With this, let me bid goodbye to you all and have a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you and namaskar.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.